They say blood is thicker than water. But what happens when the ties that bind are tested in front of the entire world? What happens when a brother, once inseparable, now looks at you with a mixture of disbelief, disappointment, and heartbreak? Imagine the scene, a stately, almost solemn room in one of the royal estates. Prince William sits alone, the weight of expectation pressing down on him. And somewhere else, across the ocean perhaps, Prince Harry watches headlines flashing his name, the world's eyes on him, and a lump rising in his throat because he knows he has disappointed the one person he trusted most. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. What Prince William revealed about Harry has not just stunned the royal family. It has left the United Kingdom in shock, social media ablaze, and countless people questioning the bonds of one of the world's most famous families. William, the elder, the heir, the one groomed his entire life to lead, didn't mince words. His statement was devastating. "I don't recognize my brother anymore." He chose fame over family. The words echo, and in those words lies a storm of emotion, frustration, betrayal, and deep sorrow. From the very first time the world saw these two brothers together, they were inseparable, laughing on the lawn of Kensington Palace, chasing each other around royal gardens, attending ceremonial events side by side. The image of unity, of a strong, loving bond, was undeniable. But the cracks were there from the start, subtle yet persistent. William, the elder, carried the heavy mantle of the monarchy, the pressure of expectation, the constant scrutiny from the public and press alike. Harry, younger, with a rebellious streak, found himself living in William's shadow. A shadow that, at times, felt suffocating. Did William always intend to overshadow? Of course not. But in the public eye, the comparison was inevitable. Every smile, every gaffe, every accolade was measured against William's measured steps. And Harry, craving freedom and identity, began to carve a different path, one that would lead to fame, wealth, and eventually, public scrutiny of his choices. But this isn't just a story of rivalry. It's a story about family, loyalty, and heartbreak. William's words were not intended for the tabloids. They were words that leaked from private conversations, whispered between aides and palace staff, then splashed across the front pages. Behind closed doors, the pain is raw. Harry, whose persona the public has long associated with charisma, fun, and a certain rebellious charm, was reported to have broken down. Tears, frustration, and disbelief followed him like a shadow. It's not every day that a person hears such profound disappointment from someone they considered a confidant, a partner in crime through childhood mischiefs, a brother in every sense of the word. And yet, here it was, laid bare for the world to witness. Consider the weight of it. A family that has lived under public scrutiny for generations, navigating the delicate balance between duty, loyalty, and personal desires, now fractured in a way few could imagine. The British public, who have grown accustomed to royal scandals, whispers, and strategic leaks, were left speechless. How could the bond between the heir to the throne and his younger brother, the charming prince who had won hearts globally, dissolve into something so tense, so painful, and so publicly discussed? The introduction of social media and relentless 24-hour news cycles has changed everything. What once might have been a private conversation, a family dispute handled quietly behind palace doors, is now a viral story in seconds. Every phrase, every inflection, every emotional reaction is scrutinized, dissected, and debated across the globe. A single leaked sentence, like William's devastating statement, is enough to ignite international conversation. And it did. Twitter exploded. Instagram feeds flooded with commentary. News outlets scrambled for context. Insiders claimed exclusive access. And the world tried to interpret what this meant for the monarchy, for the public image of the brothers, and for the royal family as a whole. Yet behind the headlines, there's an untold story. A story of moments too intimate for the public eye, of conversations cut short by tension, of birthday gatherings and family events where smiles mask silent hurt. There were times William reached out, attempting to bridge the growing chasm between them. Calls made, messages sent, meetings requested. And Harry, pulled by ambition, fame, or perhaps a desire to escape a role he never asked for, seemed to step further away with each gesture. The tragedy isn't just that they grew apart. It's that the world is watching every step of that separation, weighing in, judging, and speculating. Ask yourself this. How would you feel if someone you trusted above all else suddenly looked at you with disappointment that cuts deeper than any insult? How would you respond if your choices, however personal, were interpreted as a betrayal by someone whose approval mattered more than anyone else's? For Harry, this isn't a hypothetical scenario. It's reality. It's the kind of emotional sting that doesn't just fade with time. It lingers, echoing in private moments, replaying in the corridors of your mind long after the public has moved on to the next viral story. And it's not just about the choices themselves, but the implications, the guilt, the second-guessing, the wondering if reconciliation is possible. This story is more than family drama. It's a reflection of the pressures of public life, the cost of fame, and the complexity of sibling relationships under the microscope. It's about love, yes, but also about expectation, duty, and the devastating reality when personal ambitions collide with familial loyalty. William's statement is not merely a critique of Harry. It is a lament for the bond they once had, for moments lost, for trust broken. And it's precisely this raw, emotional truth that has captivated the UK, leaving citizens and observers alike reeling. But let's not forget the human element here. Harry, despite all the fame, all the money, and all the adulation, is still a man capable of hurt, regret, and reflection. A man who, according to sources, wept in private, not for the tabloids, not for the cameras, but for the bond that was slipping away, perhaps forever. And it's this combination of public spectacle and private anguish that makes the story so compelling. It is relatable, despite the royal backdrop. Haven't we all faced moments where someone we loved and trusted felt betrayed by our choices? Haven't we all, at one time or another, wished to explain ourselves but found the distance too vast, the misunderstanding too deep? In the midst of all this, the question arises, what comes next? What happens when the most watched family in the world faces a fracture that cannot be ignored? How does one mend a relationship when every word, every gesture, every attempt at reconciliation is subject to global scrutiny? And more importantly, can the bond between two brothers, once thought unbreakable, survive when one brother believes the other chose fame over family? These are questions that remain unanswered, lingering like a shadow over every headline and news story. But the story is far from over. Because while the world focuses on the shock of William's words, there are layers yet to uncover. Conversations you've never heard. Private moments unseen by the cameras. Decisions that shaped the trajectory of both their lives. Decisions that have left consequences not only for them, but for everyone around them. And the most shocking part? Some of the revelations you're about to hear will challenge everything you thought you knew about the royal family, about loyalty, and about the cost of fame. What William said to Harry in those private moments was not merely a rebuke. It was a mirror reflecting a path diverged, a bond strained, and a love tested in ways most of us can only imagine. And Harry's reaction, raw and unfiltered, gives the world a rare glimpse into the heart of a man struggling between duty, personal desire, and the judgment of someone he once held dear above all else. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The tears, the words, the silent stares. All of it was a prelude to revelations that would leave the UK, and indeed the world, in stunned disbelief. The question now is simple yet profound. Can a brotherly bond survive such betrayal? Or has the choice of fame over family created a rift too deep to ever mend? They were once inseparable, two boys running through the manicured gardens of Kensington Palace, laughing without a care, oblivious to the world watching their every move. Prince William and Prince Harry were not just brothers. They were partners in mischief, confidants, and companions in a life defined by tradition, duty, and public scrutiny. But how did these two princes, so close as children, end up at odds in a way that has captivated an entire nation? Imagine growing up in the public eye. Every smile you flash, every word you utter, every minor mistake magnified for millions to see. For William, the elder by 3 years, life was a series of lessons in responsibility. From a young age, he was taught that he would one day inherit the weight of the crown, a responsibility that demanded composure, diplomacy, and a sense of duty beyond personal desire. Harry, by contrast, was the wild child, spirited, charming, and mischievous, often using humor and irreverence as a shield against the pressures that constantly bore down on him. As children, their bond was unmistakable. Family photographs show them holding hands, beaming at royal events, whispering secrets to each other during formal ceremonies. The older brother would often take the lead in games and activities, teaching Harry how to navigate the complexities of palace life, while Harry brought spontaneity and laughter, challenging William's seriousness in the most endearing ways. They were two halves of the same whole, balancing each other in ways that neither the public nor the monarchy fully understood. But even in those early days, subtle differences began to emerge. William, shaped by expectation, often felt the weight of responsibility pressing upon him. Harry, yearning for individuality and freedom, sometimes chafed against the rigid structure surrounding them. This tension, though minor at first, would grow over the years, like an invisible fault line waiting to shift. For every laugh, there were moments of quiet envy. For every shared triumph, a shadow of comparison lingered. Their bond was also tested by tragedy. The loss of Princess Diana was an event that reshaped both their lives forever. William, old enough to understand the magnitude of public scrutiny, assumed a protective role. He tried to shield Harry from the relentless media attention and the emotional turbulence that followed. Harry, in turn, leaned on William, but he also felt the sting of being in a world that demanded maturity too soon, a world that had taken his mother and left him with scars both visible and hidden. The way each brother processed grief created another subtle distinction between them. William internalized, carrying his pain with quiet resolve. Harry expressed his anguish through rebellion, a search for outlets and experiences that allowed him to feel alive amidst the loss. Their childhood also reflected a complex mixture of privilege and expectation. Royal education, public appearances, and meticulously planned events were part of their daily reality. Yet amidst the ceremony, the hierarchy, and the tradition, they found moments of rebellion and connection. Late-night pillow fights, whispered jokes in empty corridors, and shared adventures in the palace gardens forged memories that would define them for life. These moments were precious, fleeting, and private, and they contrasted sharply with the very public lives they were destined to lead. However, the differences that seemed minor as children became more pronounced as they grew. William developed a strong sense of duty, a measured approach to relationships, and a careful understanding of public perception. Harry, ever the spirited younger brother, leaned into spontaneity, adventure, and personal freedom, often clashing with the rigid expectations surrounding him. The world loved him for it. The press labeled him the charming rebel, the brother willing to defy convention, the prince who could laugh and make others laugh in ways William could not. And yet, for all the differences, the bond remained, at least on the surface. Public appearances still showed smiles, laughter, and unity. Interviews spoke of mutual respect, shared experiences, and an unspoken understanding that family comes first. But beneath the polished exterior, tensions were growing. The first signs of strain were subtle. Disagreements over how to handle media attention, differing approaches to royal duty, and even small conflicts about priorities. What the public could not see were the private moments, the whispered conversations in the quiet of palace rooms, the disagreements that left emotional marks invisible to the cameras. William, who had long assumed the role of protector and elder, began to notice that Harry's path was diverging. Choices that seemed small, late-night outings, friendships with celebrities, independent projects, were beginning to form patterns. Patterns that suggested Harry valued personal freedom and public recognition more than the traditional loyalty expected within the royal family. Consider this. As young men, they shared the same upbringing, the same tutors, and the same rules. Yet, their responses were vastly different. William embraced the responsibility that came with his role. Harry, in moments of rebellion, sometimes pushed against it, testing boundaries, seeking validation outside the palace walls. The contrast was stark, and while it did not immediately threaten their bond, it planted seeds of future conflict. There were also moments of lighthearted rivalry. William, aware of Harry's mischievous nature, sometimes tried to rein him in. Harry, on the other hand, thrived on pushing William's buttons, teasing him with playful jabs and clever pranks. Their relationship, therefore, was a dynamic blend of admiration, competition, and love. They understood each other in ways few outsiders could, yet they were also growing into separate individuals, each with distinct priorities and perspectives on life, duty, and fame. As the brothers transitioned into adulthood, the stakes increased. William, preparing for marriage and eventual kingship, faced immense pressure to embody the perfect prince, the future king, the face of stability. Harry, carving out his identity in a world of public fascination, began to pursue endeavors that diverged from tradition. Charitable projects abroad, adventurous undertakings, and high-profile relationships that drew intense media attention. The differences between them became more pronounced with every decision. But despite these growing differences, the bond still existed, though now it was fragile. Family events, shared public appearances, and private dinners provided opportunities to reconnect. Smiles were exchanged, conversations held, and fleeting moments of camaraderie were evident. Yet underneath, the tension simmered. William began to feel a sense of disappointment. Harry, chasing freedom and recognition, often seemed oblivious to the weight of tradition and expectation that William carried so carefully. The turning point was subtle, almost imperceptible. It was not a single dramatic event, but rather a series of small moments that, together, began to fracture the once unshakable bond. A comment left unsaid, a disagreement over media handling, the growing divide between personal ambition and family duty. All of these contributed to the widening gap. And then, over time, what was once playful banter turned into tense silence. What was once shared laughter became a polite nod in public, and the bond that had defined their childhood began to feel like a distant memory. Yet, even in the midst of this growing divide, there were moments of hope. William, deeply aware of the importance of family, attempted to bridge the gap. Private calls were made, messages sent, gestures of reconciliation offered. Harry, for his part, occasionally responded, showing glimpses of the brother he once was. But each attempt was met with resistance, miscommunication, or interference from the relentless scrutiny of public life. The palace walls, once a place of protection and family warmth, now became witnesses to the unfolding tension, bearing silent testimony to a relationship strained to its limits. And now, as we stand at the moment when William's shocking words became public, it is essential to understand the depth of the bond that existed before it all went wrong. Without knowing the foundation, the laughter, the shared adventures, the protection and mentorship, the rivalry and mischief, the impact of those words cannot be fully appreciated. I don't recognize my brother anymore. He chose fame over family. To hear that from someone you grew up with, trusted, and loved more than anyone else in the world, it is a pain that reverberates far beyond the walls of palaces or the columns of newspapers. So, what happened between two brothers who were once inseparable? How did the bond that survived childhood, tragedy, and public scrutiny begin to unravel? And most importantly, can it ever be repaired? The answers are complex, layered, and fraught with emotion. They involve choices, priorities, and the often brutal collision of personal desire with familial obligation. But what came next? The events, the words, the tears, would take the story to a level that left not just the royal family, but an entire nation in stunned disbelief. And just when it seemed there might still be hope, when glimpses of the past bond offered a flicker of reconciliation, the first public cracks began to appear. Private conversations leaked, and William's dismay became undeniable. The brother he had known, laughed with, and protected was now walking a path that felt alien. And for Harry, the realization that his choices were viewed as a betrayal would mark the beginning of an emotional journey that few could have anticipated. Growing up in the shadow of the crown is not like growing up anywhere else. For William and Harry, childhood wasn't measured in birthday parties or sleepovers with friends. It was measured in public appearances, photo ops, ceremonial duties, and lessons in comportment that would prepare them to live their entire lives under the most unforgiving scrutiny imaginable. Imagine being a child whose every action, every laugh, every mistake could become a headline across the globe. Now imagine doing that while grieving the sudden loss of your mother, and trying to find your own identity amid expectations you never asked for. The pressure on William was immense from the very beginning. As the eldest son, he was not just a prince, he was heir to the throne. Every decision he made, every interaction he had, was analyzed in the cold, calculating eye of history and the media. The rules were rigid. You smiled when told, you bowed when appropriate, and your emotions were always carefully controlled. Spontaneity was a luxury, and rebellion a danger. Even as a young boy, William understood that he carried a legacy far larger than himself. That realization created a quiet intensity in him, a seriousness that sometimes felt foreign to his younger brother. Harry, on the other hand, while sharing the same upbringing, had a different emotional landscape. He inherited Diana's warmth, charisma, and penchant for humor, but he also inherited a restless spirit. Unlike William, who internalized the weight of duty, Harry externalized his feelings, sometimes through adventure, sometimes through rebellion. He sought freedom in ways William did not, craving a space to define himself outside of expectation. And yet, the palace walls offered little sanctuary. Every playful misstep risked public condemnation. Every moment of rebellion was magnified, dissected, and judged. From a young age, the brothers were acutely aware of public perception. Lessons in public speaking, protocol, and royal etiquette were not optional. They were survival skills. They were taught that a slip of the tongue, a poorly timed laugh, or an unguarded comment could be broadcast worldwide and used to tarnish their image. For William, this meant learning to master composure, to anticipate scrutiny, and to navigate the public eye with precision. For Harry, it meant balancing the natural desire to be seen as himself with the consequences of deviating from expectation, a constant tension that would shape both his personality and his choices. Yet childhood alone could not shield them from the tragic reality of their lives. Princess Diana's death left an indelible mark, particularly on William. At that moment, he stepped into a protective role, both for himself and for his younger brother. He assumed the responsibility of guiding Harry through grief, offering the stability and guidance he thought necessary to navigate such a catastrophic loss. Harry, however, processed grief differently. He sought ways to escape the weight of sadness, often through adventure and high-profile endeavors that allowed him to reclaim a sense of control over his own life. The difference in how they grieved created subtle but lasting tensions. Even their education was structured around royal duties. Tutors, specialized curricula, and strict schedules left little room for the spontaneity most children take for granted. Sports, music, and hobbies existed, but always under supervision and with the expectation of representing the family honorably. William thrived in this structured environment, seeing it as a framework for his future role as king. Harry, though capable, often chafed at the confines, feeling constrained by rules that seemed to prioritize appearance over authenticity. These differences, minor in childhood, would later become significant. But life inside the palace wasn't all tension. There were moments of joy, humor, and genuine sibling connection. William would teach Harry the nuances of public interaction. Harry would challenge William to laugh more, to loosen the rigidity imposed by tradition. They had each other, a constant companionship in a world where friends came and went, and where the public's gaze was relentless. The cameras captured their smiles, their playful gestures, their laughter at public events, images that projected unity, warmth, and family cohesion. Behind the scenes, however, the pressures were mounting. Every decision, every interaction, had implications beyond the immediate moment. A poorly judged remark could spark a media frenzy. A misinterpreted action could dominate headlines for days. William's approach was cautious and calculated. Harry's approach was bold, adventurous, and occasionally reckless. These differences in approach were manageable at first, but over time, they began to create friction. The public saw two charismatic princes, brothers who seemed close, but they did not see the subtle resentments, the misunderstandings, or the growing emotional distance. The scrutiny of the media played a critical role. Harry, aware of the world's fascination with him, began to navigate the media on his terms, sometimes courting attention to create independence, sometimes reacting against it in frustration. William, tasked with upholding the image of the future king, found Harry's public actions increasingly frustrating. Every headline, every viral photo, every controversial remark felt like a reflection not just of Harry, but of the family as a whole. And so, the tension between personal desire and familial duty intensified. There were also social pressures. Relationships, both personal and professional, were complicated by public expectations. Every girlfriend, friend, or ally was scrutinized. Every choice Harry made in love, career, or public life was measured against William's sense of propriety. William, by contrast, developed a measured approach, understanding that his actions were constantly observed and would shape the perception of the monarchy for generations. This difference in approach became a subtle source of friction. Even leisure was pressured. Family vacations, charity events, and public appearances were orchestrated with precision. Yet within these structured moments, William and Harry found pockets of freedom. Adventures in the countryside, playful rivalries in games, and whispered conversations late at night allowed them to maintain a semblance of normalcy. But these moments were fleeting, and the pressures of royal life always loomed nearby, a constant reminder that childhood innocence was limited and temporary. As they entered adolescence, the divide became more pronounced. William increasingly embraced his role within the monarchy, understanding that public perception, media relations, and adherence to protocol were essential to fulfilling his future responsibilities. Harry, while capable of the same discipline, increasingly sought experiences that were personally fulfilling rather than publicly approved. He traveled, volunteered, and engaged with causes that mattered to him, sometimes in ways that were unconventional and sometimes in ways that drew criticism. The gap between expectation and individuality widened. The tension was subtle, almost imperceptible to outsiders. The public continued to see smiles, formal gestures, and appearances that suggested unity. But within private spaces, conversations began to carry an undertone of strain. Gentle disagreements became sharper. Misunderstandings lingered. Frustrations, long held in silence, began to surface. William felt the burden of responsibility not just for his own actions, but for Harry's, and he feared that Harry's choices would not only impact him personally, but also the monarchy as a whole. And yet, despite these pressures, there were still moments of connection. William and Harry shared memories, holidays, and events that reminded them of the bond forged in childhood. They laughed, teased, and occasionally found themselves aligned in purpose. But those moments were fleeting, overshadowed by the relentless pressure of expectation and the growing realization that their paths were diverging. William began to see signs that Harry's priorities were shifting. The public, too, began to notice. Harry's growing independence, coupled with media coverage of his social endeavors and relationships, painted a picture of a brother carving his own path, a path that sometimes conflicted with William's sense of duty. The contrast between William's measured, cautious approach and Harry's bold, adventurous choices became a defining feature of their relationship. So, the question becomes clear. How does one maintain a bond in the face of relentless pressure, public scrutiny, and diverging life paths? William and Harry tried. They attempted to communicate, to reconcile differences, and to support one another. But the pressures of royal life, amplified by grief, expectation, and media scrutiny, created obstacles that proved increasingly difficult to navigate. Every effort at connection was shadowed by miscommunication, public speculation, and the weight of responsibility. And now, as the story unfolds and William's shocking statement about his brother is revealed, it is essential to understand the magnitude of pressure both brothers endured. William's words, "I don't recognize my brother anymore. He chose fame over family," are not merely a critique. They are the culmination of years of strain, conflicting priorities, and emotional fatigue. They reflect the intense pressure of royal life and the heartbreaking realization that the bond he once relied upon may have shifted irrevocably. Imagine living a life where every word you speak, every move you make, every choice you ponder is instantly broadcast, dissected, and judged by millions of strangers. For Prince Harry, this reality became increasingly suffocating as he transitioned from mischievous royal child to young adult in the public eye. And yet, for all the pressures, he began to find a path that diverged from the careful, calculated expectations of his elder brother, William. a path that would eventually ignite tension, resentment, and heartbreak within one of the world's most scrutinized families. From the moment Harry stepped into adolescence, the media was relentless. Headlines chronicled his every misstep, tabloids sensationalized moments of rebellion, and paparazzi pursued him across the globe. The world adored him as the charming, spirited younger prince, a man with humor, charisma, and just enough rebellion to be exciting. Yet William, ever mindful of the monarchy's image, saw these headlines differently. Where Harry saw attention, William saw exposure. Where Harry saw individuality, William saw risk. And thus began the widening gulf between the brothers, a gulf shaped as much by public perception as by private choices. Consider the paradox. Fame brought Harry freedom, but it also brought isolation. Every smile captured for a magazine cover, every joke misinterpreted on social media, every adventure abroad became a double-edged sword. He was celebrated for his boldness, but criticized for it in equal measure. He was lauded for his independence, but condemned for deviating from the expected path of royal duty. For William, who had long prioritized stability, discretion, and tradition, Harry's behavior felt like a challenge not just to protocol, but to the very fabric of the family legacy. The media storm was relentless. Tabloids painted Harry as the reckless younger brother, the one who flirted with fame, celebrity culture, and risk, while William was cast as the responsible heir, the steadfast future king. Stories of late-night parties, private trips, and adventurous outings were splashed across headlines, often exaggerated or sensationalized. Every relationship Harry pursued, every project he undertook, became fodder for global commentary. And every exaggeration, every misinterpretation, widened the gap between the brothers further. Harry tried to navigate it on his terms. He engaged in charity work abroad, pursued causes close to his heart, and cultivated a sense of individuality outside of royal constraints. Yet, each endeavor was scrutinized. Each headline, no matter how positive, carried an undertone of judgment. Prince Harry breaks tradition again. Younger prince defies royal expectations. Harry prioritizes fame over family. These narratives, repeated endlessly, shaped public perception and, importantly, influenced William's view of his younger brother. William, observing these developments, began to feel a growing sense of frustration. He had spent years cultivating an image of responsibility, duty, and loyalty, understanding that every action he took would reflect not only on himself, but on the monarchy. Harry's choices, while seemingly innocent or adventurous to some, increasingly appeared to William as a rejection of family, tradition, and the careful balance required to maintain royal stability. And with each publicized adventure, William's concern deepened, transforming slowly into despair. The tipping point came with a series of high-profile events. Harry's relationships and projects were relentlessly covered by the press, each headline more dramatic than the last. While William focused on formal duties, engagements, and long-term preparation for the throne, Harry pursued experiences that, though personally meaningful, were sensationalized as acts of rebellion. Every appearance at a charity event, every interaction with celebrities, every trip abroad became a narrative of choice versus expectation. And William, witnessing this, began to feel as though his brother had chosen fame over family, and there was no turning back. Social media amplified everything. Public reaction was swift, divisive, and often harsh. Supporters praised Harry for his independence and courage, while critics condemned him for perceived disrespect and lack of loyalty. Each post, each viral tweet, each opinion piece added layers of complexity to a relationship already strained by private misunderstandings and the inherent pressures of royal life. Harry's attempts at carving his own path were no longer private matters. They were global spectacles. And then there were the contradictions. While Harry sought freedom, he was also deeply connected to family legacy. He wanted recognition, but he also valued loyalty. He craved privacy, yet he sometimes courted attention to assert his independence. These contradictions created tension not only within himself, but within his relationship with William. The elder brother, focused on duty and tradition, struggled to reconcile these actions with the image of the younger brother he once knew. The emotional toll was immense. Harry's choices, magnified by the media, began to shape how he was perceived by his family, the public, and even himself. He experienced moments of pride, exhilaration, and fulfillment in his independent pursuits. But he also experienced guilt, isolation, and the crushing weight of being constantly misinterpreted. William, observing from the lens of duty and responsibility, interpreted these moments as deliberate choices against family, a decision to prioritize fame over connection. Ask yourself this. How would you feel if someone you loved deeply, someone you grew up with, someone who once shared every secret and adventure with you, now seemed to exist in an alternate world? A world where public image, celebrity, and personal ambition took precedence over shared history, family loyalty, and mutual understanding? This is exactly the emotional landscape that William navigated, and it was fraught with heartbreak. And then came the private conversations, those moments unseen by the world. Reports suggest that William, unable to remain silent, attempted to communicate his concerns to Harry in private. Discussions were tense, emotional, and laden with years of unspoken disappointment. William's words were carefully chosen, yet heavy with sorrow. Harry, already under the microscope of public attention, responded with emotion, frustration, and defensiveness. The media, unaware of the content of these private conversations, speculated endlessly, magnifying tension and interpreting every subtle gesture as a sign of irreparable conflict. It was in this crucible of public scrutiny and private tension that William's famous line took shape. "I don't recognize my brother anymore. He chose fame over family." Those words, though simple, encapsulated decades of observation, emotional investment, and heartbreak. They were the culmination of witnessing a sibling navigate life under impossible pressures, making choices that seemed to prioritize public perception and personal ambition over shared bonds. The UK was stunned. The media frenzy that followed was unparalleled. Newspapers splash. The headline across front pages. Talk shows dissected the meaning of every word. Social media erupted in speculation, debate, and judgment. Supporters of Harry defended his choices, pointing to his charitable work and independent pursuits. Critics aligned with William, framing Harry's actions as reckless, self-serving, and a betrayal of family loyalty. And in the midst of it all, the brothers remained human, struggling privately with emotions that no headline could fully convey. But the story does not end with public perception. Behind the headlines were moments of private heartbreak. Reports indicate that Harry, upon hearing William's words, experienced an emotional breakdown. Tears were shed, voices cracked, and the reality of his brother's disappointment hit with devastating clarity. These moments, though unseen by the public, are what make the story so compelling. The collision of private emotion and public narrative, the interplay between personal choice and familial expectation. And here lies the ultimate question. Can family survive when personal ambition and public scrutiny collide so violently? Can bonds forged in childhood withstand decades of divergent paths, media pressure, and differing priorities? For William and Harry, the answers are far from simple. What began as playful sibling rivalry, adventurous escapades, and mutual support has evolved into a complex web of misunderstanding, disappointment, and emotional distance. But even amidst the media storm, there were glimmers of hope. Private gestures, rare moments of connection, and shared memories reminded both brothers of the bond they once had. Yet, each attempt at reconciliation was overshadowed by headlines, rumors, and public speculation. It became a delicate dance. One misstep, one poorly interpreted word, and the entire narrative could spiral. And just when it seemed the tension had reached its peak, the story took another dramatic turn. Private messages leaked, conversations surfaced, and suddenly the entire UK was not only watching but emotionally invested in every twist and revelation. What had been a private struggle between two brothers now became a national conversation about loyalty, fame, and family. Imagine this: a quiet room within the palace, the hum of distant activity outside, and two brothers sitting across from one another. The cameras aren't rolling. No reporters are waiting. This is supposed to be private, a conversation between family, a moment meant to bridge a widening gap. But even in the silence, tension crackles like electricity in the air. Every word matters. Every pause carries weight. And what comes out of that room will ripple far beyond these walls, eventually shocking the entire UK and leaving Prince Harry in tears. It all began with messages and conversations that were meant to remain private. One source tells of late-night phone calls between William and Harry, filled with careful words, concern, and frustration. William, ever conscious of duty and image, tried to convey a sense of urgency, a plea that his younger brother consider the implications of his choices, not just for himself, but for their family and the monarchy. Harry, emotional and defensive, responded with a mix of honesty, vulnerability, and irritation. These calls, intimate and emotionally charged, reflected years of tension building quietly under the surface. The leaks started subtly, whispers from palace aides, offhand comments in private conversations, and small snippets of dialogue that escaped intended confidentiality. At first, the leaks seemed inconsequential, trivial even. But then the content of some conversations became public. William expressing heartbreak over Harry's choices, Harry defending his independence, both brothers articulating frustrations that the world had only ever glimpsed indirectly. The media quickly seized on these moments, and suddenly what was private became a matter of public obsession. One of the most shocking revelations came from a conversation reportedly between William and Harry about Harry's life choices. William, in a tone both measured and sorrowful, said something that would soon dominate headlines. "I don't recognize my brother anymore. He chose fame over family." These words, though spoken in a private moment of vulnerability and desperation, were leaked to the press. For William, the statement was meant as a wake-up call, a bridge, a way to communicate disappointment and hope for reconciliation. For Harry, it was devastating, not just the words themselves, but the fact that they had reached public ears, stripped of context and nuance. The fallout was immediate. Tabloids splashed the quote across front pages. Pundits and commentators dissected it endlessly. Social media exploded with speculation, judgment, and outrage. Fans and critics alike weighed in, debating whether William was right, whether Harry had gone too far, or whether the monarchy itself was at fault. And amidst all this public frenzy, the brothers remained human, dealing with raw emotion and private grief. But there was more than just one conversation. Sources revealed multiple exchanges, both over the phone and in person, in which William tried to express his concern, frustration, and heartbreak. Harry's responses ranged from emotional deflection to genuine remorse, but also occasional defensiveness. Every attempt to communicate was fraught with tension. In the controlled environment of the palace, the stakes were high. Words could not only hurt relationships, but also shape public perception, potentially impacting the monarchy itself. The leaks themselves added another layer of tension. Staff members, aides, and even distant acquaintances inadvertently became carriers of information that eventually reached the press. Some leaks were accidental, some were intentional, and all were magnified by an audience hungry for scandal. Each snippet painted a slightly different picture. William as the disappointed elder, Harry as the rebellious younger brother, and the family as a house divided. The leaks did more than reveal private words. They revealed fractures that had been building quietly for years. Harry, upon learning of the leaks, reportedly experienced a profound sense of betrayal, not by William, but by the intrusion into what should have been a private space. Imagine the compounded pain. You are already struggling with the weight of familial disappointment, and then the world suddenly sees your most intimate conversations dissected and judged without context. The humiliation, grief, and frustration were palpable. Sources describe him as visibly shaken, retreating into private spaces to process the storm, sometimes breaking down in ways that reminded those close to him of the grief of his younger years. One of the most emotionally charged leaks reportedly involved a discussion about Harry's public image and his pursuit of fame. William, in a calm but stern voice, emphasized the importance of family over personal ambition. He spoke of tradition, loyalty, and the responsibilities that come with being part of the royal family. Harry, however, defended his choices, citing his desire for personal fulfillment, independence, and a life outside the strictures of royalty. The conversation, though intended as a dialogue, quickly became a clash of values and expectations, and when it reached the public, it seemed like an outright confrontation. The media framed it as a feud, a dramatic showdown between two royal brothers whose bond had been tested beyond repair. The narrative quickly simplified the complex emotions into digestible soundbites. William as the responsible, duty-driven heir, Harry as the fame-seeking rebel, a family torn apart for the world to see. While this made for sensational headlines, it stripped the nuance from private exchanges, turning genuine emotion into spectacle. And this spectacle intensified the emotional distance between the brothers, making reconciliation more difficult. Public reaction added another layer of strain. Some viewers sympathized with Harry, applauding his independence and willingness to challenge tradition. Others sided with William, praising his dedication to duty and criticizing Harry's pursuit of fame. Comment sections, social media threads, and editorial columns buzzed with debate. And through it all, the brothers were forced to contend with the public perception of their private pain. Every decision, every action, every attempt to respond was viewed through the lens of a global audience. The impact of these leaked conversations was profound not just on Harry, but on William as well. Sources indicate that William experienced a mixture of frustration, disappointment, and sadness. He had hoped that his private words would encourage reflection and, perhaps, reconciliation. Instead, they became public fodder, further fueling the narrative of a family in crisis. For a man trained to maintain composure under pressure, the leaks represented a loss of control, both over the situation and over the way the world perceived his family. And yet, even amidst the chaos, there were moments of reflection. Some insiders report that William's intent was never punitive. His goal was to express his feelings honestly, to confront the divergence between the brothers' paths, and to urge Harry to consider the weight of his decisions. Harry, for his part, struggled to process both the disappointment of his brother and the intrusion of the media into his private life. The emotional complexity of these moments is what makes them resonate so deeply with the public. Think about it. How would you feel if your most private conversations, the ones in which you bare your heart, express frustration, or seek understanding, were suddenly public property? The intimacy of dialogue becomes public spectacle. The vulnerability you offered is scrutinized, mocked, or sensationalized. The very act of speaking your truth becomes a weapon in someone else's narrative. This is the reality that Harry faced, and it magnified the emotional stakes in ways few could have anticipated. Even after the leaks, the attempts at private communication continued, but now under an added layer of tension. Every phone call, every message, carried the knowledge that it could be exposed. This awareness altered the dynamics of their interactions, making reconciliation more difficult. It's one thing to argue in private. It's another to argue knowing the world might be listening. The pressure compounded, leaving both brothers emotionally exhausted, frustrated, and cautious. The situation was further complicated by the reactions of other family members and aides. The palace, already sensitive to media scrutiny, became a site of strategic concern. Decisions about what information could be shared, what could be controlled, and what would inevitably leak required careful navigation. Every attempt to protect private moments inadvertently created additional tension. It became clear that the leaks were not merely about words. They were about control, perception, and the impossibility of privacy in a life lived under constant observation. And then there was the emotional toll on Harry. Witnesses describe him as retreating, struggling to process the dual weight of personal disappointment and public exposure. The leaks not only exposed his vulnerabilities, but also seemed to reinforce William's perception that Harry prioritized fame over family. The feedback loop was brutal. Every leak confirmed the distance. Every public reaction amplified the strain, and every private moment carried the shadow of potential exposure. As the UK absorbed the leaked conversations, the narrative crystallized. A family once united now appeared divided. The public, hungry for drama, dissected every phrase. Commentary ranged from sympathetic to critical, with everyone eager to take a side. Yet beneath the headlines lay a deeper, more painful truth. Two brothers, both struggling under the weight of expectation, grief, and public scrutiny, were caught in a situation that left neither fully satisfied, both emotionally strained, and the bond between them under unprecedented stress. But the story does not end with mere exposure. The leaks set the stage for what was to come. a series of events that would escalate the conflict, test family loyalty, and produce emotional reactions so raw that Harry himself reportedly broke down in ways even those closest to him had never witnessed. The private had become public, the personal became political, and the emotional consequences would ripple far beyond the walls of the palace. No one expected the impact of William's words to be so immediate and so devastating. "I don't recognize my brother anymore. He chose fame over family." For the world, these words were a headline, a dramatic quote, a sensational story. But for Harry, they were a mirror, reflecting disappointment, heartbreak, and a reality he could no longer avoid. Imagine the weight of hearing that from someone you grew up with, someone you trusted above all else, someone who once shared every secret and every adventure with you. It was as if the foundation of his life had shifted beneath him. The emotional fallout began quietly, behind closed doors. Harry reportedly retreated to private spaces within his home, shutting out aides, media, and even close friends. He paced, replayed the conversation in his mind, and allowed the raw impact of William's words to settle. Tears came, not the staged tears the public might imagine for photo ops, but real, unfiltered emotion. The kind that grips the chest, makes your hands tremble, and leaves you staring at walls as though seeking answers where none exist. For a man who had grown up in the public eye, accustomed to managing emotions with composure, this breakdown was profound. Harry's emotional reaction was compounded by the public nature of the situation. Unlike a private argument between siblings, his vulnerability was now intertwined with headlines, leaks, and social media speculation. Every glance at his phone reminded him of the world watching, the commentary, the judgment, the relentless scrutiny. And yet, the pain was undeniable. Consider the intensity of this moment. Harry, who had been celebrated for his charisma and charm, suddenly faced the stark reality that the person whose approval mattered most viewed him as someone lost to ambition, someone who had strayed too far from the family path. The dichotomy between his public persona and private turmoil was staggering. On one side, he was the prince adored by millions, a man of adventure and purpose. On the other, he was a brother, deeply hurt, isolated, and struggling with the crushing weight of perceived betrayal. The breakdown was not only emotional, but physical. Sources describe Harry pacing late into the night, sleepless, sometimes silent for hours, other times voicing anguish in conversations with close confidants. He questioned himself, second-guessed every decision, and grappled with guilt for choices he believed had been necessary for his personal growth. The irony was palpable. The pursuit of freedom and self-definition, actions he thought would empower him, now felt like the very thing that caused a rift with William, the person he loved most. And then came the public dimension. The moment the leaks hit, social media erupted. Memes, posts, and comment threads debated Harry's actions, often painting him as the reckless younger brother, a man prioritizing fame over family. While this may have been entertaining for some, for Harry it was a relentless echo chamber of guilt, frustration, and emotional pressure. Every headline, every post, seemed to validate William's words, reinforcing a sense of isolation and deepening the emotional impact. But the emotional fallout extended beyond Harry alone. Those close to him, friends, aides, and even family members, were caught in a web of tension, unsure how to support him without exacerbating the media frenzy. They observed his vulnerability, witnessed his tears, and felt powerless in the face of a situation that had spilled from private conversations into global speculation. Harry's pain was no longer a private matter. It was a spectacle, a story consumed by millions, dissected by experts, and sensationalized by media outlets. Yet, amidst this turmoil, there were moments of reflection. Some sources suggest that Harry, while devastated, began to process the broader implications of William's statement. He recognized the depth of disappointment, the history of shared experiences, and the weight of familial expectation. There was a profound internal struggle. How to reconcile his desire for independence with the undeniable bond and love he still felt for his brother. The tears, the anguish, and the frustration were intertwined with memories of laughter, shared childhood adventures, and moments when he and William had been inseparable. The contrast between public perception and private reality was stark. The world saw a royal feud, a dramatic breakdown, and a sensational story of betrayal. But behind the headlines, Harry was experiencing something far more complex: grief, regret, confusion, and the painful recognition that choices meant to define his identity had come at the cost of familial connection. Every emotional beat, every flash of tears, reflected decades of shared history, deep affection, and unspoken expectations. Even the royal aides closest to Harry reported the intensity of the emotional fallout. Meetings, phone calls, and daily routines became infused with tension. Harry, normally composed in public, struggled to maintain control in private. Tears would flow unexpectedly, voices would crack, and moments of silence would stretch for hours, punctuated only by the weight of reflection. For those observing, it was clear that this was more than temporary frustration. It was a profound emotional reckoning. The psychological strain was compounded by the ongoing public narrative. Every new headline, every discussion on news programs, every viral social media post acted as a mirror, reflecting the fracture back at Harry in increasingly stark terms. Friends and confidants tried to shield him, but there was little they could do against the relentless tide of media coverage. In essence, the emotional fallout was not only internal but externally amplified, creating a pressure cooker environment that few could survive without some form of visible breakdown. And then there were moments of confrontation. Sources report that private meetings between Harry and William became increasingly tense. William, attempting to express his disappointment and hope for reconciliation, faced resistance. Harry, emotional and defensive, struggled to articulate his perspective while processing the hurt inflicted by his brother's perception of his choices. These moments, private and intense, were pivotal in shaping the trajectory of their relationship. The emotional fallout was no longer about a single statement. It became a pattern, a cycle of confrontation, reflection, and residual pain. Audience question for reflection. How would you respond if someone you loved deeply told you they no longer recognized the person you had become? Could you reconcile the hurt with the love you still felt? Or would the emotional weight become unbearable? For Harry, these questions were not hypothetical. They were lived experience. The tears, however, were not just a sign of weakness. They were a testament to the depth of connection, the enduring love between brothers, and the pain of realizing that a lifetime of shared experience could be strained, perhaps irreparably, by choices, priorities, and public perception. Every drop of emotion carried history: playground laughter, childhood adventures, shared grief, and moments of unspoken understanding. And as the public consumed the story, few realized that behind the sensational headlines was a profound human moment. A man, alone in his grief, confronting the emotional consequences of both personal choices and familial expectations. The emotional fallout extended into decisions that would shape Harry's life moving forward. Sources indicate that the experience prompted introspection about his role within the family, his personal identity, and his relationship with the public. The tears, while private, marked a turning point, a recognition that the gap between fame and family was real, tangible, and emotionally devastating. It was a moment that would influence future actions, media interactions, and even his perception of duty, loyalty, and love. And yet, even in the midst of heartbreak, there was a glimmer of understanding. Harry, while devastated, began to comprehend the depth of William's feelings, the weight of expectation, and the importance of family loyalty. But comprehension did not erase hurt. Recognition of disappointment did not mend the rift. The emotional fallout was ongoing, a storm that had no clear end in sight, leaving Harry to navigate grief, guilt, and a profound sense of loss in the private spaces of his life. As the UK watched headlines, debated the meaning of William's words, and speculated about Harry's response, the reality of the emotional fallout remained largely unseen. Behind the glamour, titles, and public appearances was a man grappling with the complexity of family, identity, and public scrutiny. The tears, the pacing, the sleepless nights. These were the human consequences of words spoken in both love and despair. And these consequences would only intensify as the story unfolded, revealing more surprises, more tension, and more emotional complexity than the public could have anticipated. The royal family, often portrayed as a model of composure, tradition, and unity, is not immune to tension. Behind the polished appearances, the perfectly staged photographs, and the meticulously coordinated public statements, real emotions simmer and conflicts ripple through private corridors. When Prince William's words about Harry leaked, "I don't recognize my brother anymore," he chose fame over family. It wasn't just Harry who felt the sting. The repercussions sent shockwaves through the entire royal household, affecting even those who seemed distant from the sibling conflict. Queen Camilla, for instance, reportedly experienced a mix of concern and frustration. Sources close to her suggest that she understood the pressure on William, empathizing with his position as heir to the throne and eldest son tasked with maintaining stability. Yet she also recognized Harry's perspective, a man struggling under the impossible weight of expectation, grief, and public scrutiny. Camilla's reaction, subtle yet significant, involved navigating the delicate balance between supporting William's authority and acknowledging Harry's individuality. Her involvement highlights the intricate web of relationships within the palace, where emotion, duty, and optics constantly intersect.